we will start the recording now. Also, as we are many online, I would like to ask the participants to mute themselves. So you can see at the bottom of your screen, normally you can mute yourself, perhaps it's on the top. And next to this, there's also 3 dots. You can click on them and start the live captioning. I'm Helen, Policy and Advocacy Officer at Inclusion Europe, and I will be moderating this event today. I'm here with my colleague Barbara, who will handle the technical aspects and who also organized and coordinated those events. So thanks to her. My Talents for Diversity is a partnership between the Antwerp Management School in Belgium, Plena Inclusion in Spain, and FPIT in Estonia. It's funded by the European Union's Rights, Equality and Citizenship Programme, and the aim is to increase the participation of people with intellectual disabilities in the open labour market. So the project started in 2019, and we have already produced some material on diversity management, such as guidelines for employers, videos and job coaching and reasonable accommodation, and customized employment and other. You can find all those documents on Inclusion Europe's website, and you can also find the videos and recording of the previous events on the YouTube channel. So today, this webinar is about employment in the next EU disability strategy, and I'm happy to welcome Katarina Ivankovic-Knežević, Milan Berglas, Hayden Hammersley, and Sufyan El Amrani. Also, I wanted to tell you before we start, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A session after our speaker's presentation. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Sufyan El Amrani. Sufyan is a self-advocate and also easy-to-read editor at Inclusion Europe. So we do work together, but we're not in the same office at the moment because of the COVID situation. And he's going to talk about the importance of employment for people with intellectual disabilities. Sufyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sufyan. I work at Inclusion Europe. I'm also a self-advocate. Now I'm going to talk to you about why having a job is important to people with intellectual disabilities. People with intellectual disabilities have a right to have a job like everyone else. For me, having a job is about being independent. It is about having co-workers, and it makes me feel that what I do at Inclusion Europe is important. I've been working with Inclusion Europe for a long time, and I'm happy with the job. But I know this is not the case for other people with intellectual disabilities. People with intellectual disabilities are left out of the job market for many reasons. For example, some people are sent to segregated schools and they're not prepared to get a job. Also, many people with intellectual disabilities don't have legal capacity, so they can't make their own decisions. This situation needs to change. We, the people with intellectual disabilities, must be able to work and get the support we need. Support can be reasonable accommodation, it can be a support employment, job coach, customized job, and so on. These are some of the examples that show how we can include more people with intellectual disabilities in the labor market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sufyan, for your input. And perhaps if we have some questions, you can ask them in the chat, and we will answer the questions after everyone's presentation. I would like now to welcome our second speaker, Mrs. Katarina Ivankovic-Knežević. She's from DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the EU Commission. So welcome and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We would be very happy if you could give us more insight on the disability strategy, What were the main advances of the 2010-2020 disability strategy, and what would be the priorities regarding employment in the next one?
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this discussion. Sufyan was very short, but very clear, I have to say, because I think you touched upon two most important elements, and this is being independent and having the social contacts and really providing for your own life. And I think this is the most valuable that we can take from your intervention. And this is also what should be visible throughout the new strategy as well. Well, it was visible in the old strategy, and I have to share with you, you know, my colleagues prepared me 23 pages of different aspects that I can underline under the topic. I'm not going to go through all of them. I will just mention the most important ones. I think that when we speak about, you know, everybody knows that we are now in the process of preparing the new strategy. And thank you all for your contributions so far. And we are going to have another round of consultations in November. We have been discussing together throughout July, but not only July, also last year when we had the first interim report presentation in our EDPD, European Day of Persons with Disabilities, or on various occasions. We had, you know, planned such a lovely consultation process this year that would have some highlights like the work forum and some other elements. But unfortunately, I think this COVID crisis showed how our planning sometimes it's so irrelevant when it comes to the higher forces. And therefore, we have to undertake a different approach. So we held the consultations virtually. I think it worked quite well. I would still prefer that we were in person. You see immediate reaction not only of the speaker, but also the body language of the participants. And you know exactly when you are going wrong that the feeling is not the right in the room, but nevertheless. So let me start with the evaluation, what evaluation has shown. And the evaluation had several important milestones. One is to see how the life of persons with disability has been or was it improved due to the 10-year strategy. Second one was to see how EU contributed to the fulfillment of the UNCRPD implementation. And the third was to see where the remaining gaps are and what should be improved. When it comes to let's start with the positive outcomes of the 10-year strategy. The biggest, or let's say the most visible outcomes were the elements relevant for the policy monitoring and data, the legislation, the awareness raising, diversity charters, funding, and cooperation with the various actors. One of the also most visible finding was that we have managed with the EDS. EDS is European Disability Strategy. With EDS to increase the visibility of the disability angle and to put it on the EU agenda, which I consider to be really one of the biggest achievements. But still, it showed many shortcomings, and it showed where we should invest in the future policies. Regarding the first element that was analyzed and monitored, which is relevant to monitoring and data, I think we still have a quite a steep path to go, because although we did have some ad hoc labor force surveys with disability included, we are still far away of having the disability disaggregated data at all levels. Now we have managed to find an agreement with the Eurostat, and starting from the next year, every 2 years, we are going to have the data disaggregated by disability in the EU SILC and labor force surveys. Still, the question is, could we go a step further and have it every day, every year? And this is definitely something that we will be looking into. Also, we had undertaken some very important studies relevant to the employment of the persons with disabilities in the EU, and this was done already very early in the implementation of the strategy in 2012 and 2015. Some of you who were in the field might remember 2015 research where we had the study and the report of the EP on the reasonable accommodation and sheltered workshops for people with disabilities, costs and returns and investments. And I think that was also a supporting base for the further actions when the European Pillar of Social Rights in 2017 was adopted. And starting from early 2000s, with the European semester process, we have managed, let's say in the midway, to really put an emphasis on the disability in the joint employment report and in the European semester country reports. And what was very important for us is that, for example, in the last circle of the country reports, we have managed to get the disability mentioned for 18 member states. And although this does not necessarily go into the recommendation, but it shows, and it's an important element of the country reports. We will see now how the process of the new semester will go, and what will happen with the specific country recommendations, because we know that next year we are only going to look into the microeconomic data. We are going to be focused also on the resilience and recovery programs, and then it is to be seen how will it all be interconnected and how will it be reflected on the ground, meaning in the member states. I think if we look at the EDS and the influence that it had, I'm absolutely positive that the European Pillar Principle 17, called Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities, is the highlight, let's say, of the previous Commission, and the principles that also contribute to the improvement of persons with disabilities is not only the Principle 17, but also the other principles relevant for the education, for childcare, for long-term care, housing, essential services. And it is important how we will reflect disability in the new and coming action plan on the pillar, because this will be our new strategy, new 10-year strategy on the values and the principles from the pillar. I think all of you are aware that we also had explicit mentioning of the disability in some legislative initiatives that are immediate result of the pillar. Probably the most known is the Work-Life Balance Directive, where in Article 5 on the parental leave, we specifically mention parents with disability, and parents with disability or parents of the children with disability, that they need to have adaptation of the parental leave. And I think this is a big achievement that will help all the parents with disabilities and also those of the children with disabilities. And it is something that is really a direct influence of our disability colleagues who were cooperating with the other DGs in preparation of the work-life balance. And I think also the new instrument that we introduced in this directive, which is a carer's leave, will also contribute to the improvement of lives of persons with disabilities and those caring for persons with disabilities. And now we are waiting for 2022 that member states have to transpose the directive. What we see is that some of them have already transposed certain elements. Most of those member states did it in light of the paternity leave or parental leave, but I think the carers leave and flexible working arrangements are still to be fixed and still to be seen how to identify. For us in employment, the Employment Equality Directive, you know, it's alpha and omega of securing inclusion of persons with disability on equal footing with the others. And we have seen that it has been mostly respected. We do not have a huge cases regarding the breach of the directive, but we still see that some of the elements of inclusion of persons with disabilities are still lacking or are addressed in an insufficient manner. And that was one of the main reasons that last year we started a big campaign on securing the anti-discrimination in employment on the basis of the Equality Directive, and focus specifically on the reasonable accommodation. Few weeks ago, I think 4 weeks ago, so the month ago, we have published our guide on the reasonable accommodation. I hope that you have seen it, at least some of you, because it's a really good guide where we gathered all the good practices within the member states. We speak about the reasonable accommodation really in so easy, understandable way. And we are really breaking this understanding of the fact that reasonable accommodation means to secure, you know, the ramp at the entrance and the wider doors to the toilet. So this is what we saw within the workshops that we had in various member states. But still this belief is alive, and still. I think we have to go further with the reasonable accommodation, really explaining what it is, how it means, how to address a person, how to secure upskilling, reskilling, how to put all those elements in place, and not only secure adapted chair or really widening the toilet doors. If going back, I have to mention the accessibility, because this is the area where most achievements have been done so far. You know very well the Web Accessibility Directive and our European Accessibility Act that was adopted last year. Yes, last year, beginning of the last year. And still a long way to transpose it, because it's 5 years transposition period for most of the elements, but still a big step in securing the accessibility that will not only help persons with disabilities, but we say that it is going to help a general public, because accessible elements are relevant for almost all population. And then if you just take the figure that more than 60% of population, 65% of population 65 plus is having some kind of disability, even if not identified or registered, I think with the Accessibility Act, the results are really going to be relevant for all of us. I'm not going to speak a lot about EU Platform on Diversity Charters, because you're also very well familiar with the platform, but it is very important to have them on board. And when we organized our campaign on the reasonable accommodation and anti-discrimination, we included the Diversity Charter representatives and members in the member states that we were having activities, and it was really extremely useful for all of us to have another insight in the Diversity Charter. Regarding the funds, we gathered the info. The latest available info is from 2018 on the implementation of Youth Employment Initiative, and 660,000 young people were supported with EA. And out of this number, 110,000 of young people with disability. So this is also something that it is important to look into, and it's extremely relevant as the Youth Employment Initiative is about employment of needs and securing their access to the labor market. Before I go to the new strategy, because I see I'm already exceeding my time, and I will try to speed it up. I think it's important to mention the work we have done with ANET platform, which was gathering the data for us and exchanging different relevant inclusion of persons with disabilities in the society, and the high-level group on disability that also did facilitate a lot implementation of the EDS and also UNCRPD in the member states. And last but not least, the cooperation we had with the civil society. I think if you look at the networks that we support and we cooperate closely with, I think it's really remarkable. And now if you look at our consultations that we had on the strategy, I think your role was crucial in gathering the information from the ground, and also your access to your partners organization within the member states is really an added value that helped us a lot. So what do we plan to do in the new strategy? I think we still have to do a lot as we see the figures and statistics is sometimes unmerciful, says that still employment rate and employment gap are quite challenging. The employment rate is of persons with disability is and comparing with the persons without disability is 52% comparing to 76% of persons without disability. And the employment gap is around almost 25 percentage point. Also, when we looked at the data, we see that persons with disabilities are more confronted with in-work poverty, and then persons without disability, and they also leave the labor markets earlier. And we see that in the age cohort, all throughout the EU, the percentage of persons with disabilities is less than 40%, comparing to almost 65% of those without disability. So these data oblige us to do a step further when it comes to the employment of persons with disabilities. We are very aware of the fact that when it comes to disability, we need to discuss also visible and invisible disabilities. And this is extremely important and relevant in the light of the various mental health issues and the various problems that require additional support, and that really represent this invisible disability. Because, you know, when we speak about disability, we always have a picture maybe of a person in a wheelchair or somebody caring for a person with a really visible disability. But if you really look at the numbers of other types of disabilities, we see that it's everywhere. It's on the street, it's in the supermarket, it's we share everyday activities with the persons with disabilities which have this invisible disability, and this is also important to have in mind when addressing and when preparing the new strategy. Did I mention that access to the labor market was when our colleagues team did the surveys among persons with disabilities, this was the first point that persons with disabilities were concerned, that they do not have access to employment. And this is also a very important prerequisite for our strategy. And then we are going to address, of course, further the accessibility. We think we did a few steps, but still we need to do additional steps. We are going to push for having more and better data. We also see that we need to find the ways how our employment services work with and for persons with disabilities. There are various ways to address it, and I'm sure that we will try to find the best possible way. Regarding the free movement of persons with disabilities, I think one of the good projects that was the European Disability and Parking Cards will continue their life in a strengthened way. But we also see, and we have a really huge request, and I would like to hear from you also on the questions relevant for the mutual recognition of disability between member states. This might be one of the biggest challenges of the mandate of the new strategy, but we see the strong need to work on it and to try to find the best possible manner to deal with it. And also I see that many of you, when you were speaking to us, have emphasized this element. We also want to secure that certain aspects that are relevant for the employment and would secure inclusion and would secure that people with disabilities remain in their workplace is skills, upskilling, reskilling, securing the adequate qualifications. And this is something that we need to pay much more attention to. We have seen, for example, challenges when it comes to the Youth Employment Initiative, that where you have the age bracket, which was in the case of Youth Guarantee, maximum 30 years or 29 years. And then the reality of persons with disabilities was that they just simply did not finalize their studies before 35 or 32 or 34. So this required also the member states to think about different. Somebody is not muted. Marco Blia. Okay, nevertheless, so this is important to also pay attention to, not only in the light of the strategy, but also in the light of various other Commission initiatives that this issue needs to be mentioned. So I will stop here. And then happy to reply on all your questions and thoughts and ideas.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ivankovic. Intervention. It was a very enriching intervention and precise details on the last strategy. We thank you very much for your work and your colleagues for your work on the employment situation of people with disabilities. And we look forward for the next strategy and action plan on the pillar and further consultations maybe to see what other instruments could improve the situation of people with disabilities. You had great news, so I hope the situation will continue to improve. Now our next speaker, I'd like to give the floor to Hayden Hammersley. He's the Social and Policy Officer at the European Disability Forum. And perhaps, Hayden, you could tell us more about DPO's perspectives. What would be what would need to be improved in the next strategy, and how can DPOs contribute to the implementation and monitoring of this next strategy? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen. I hope everybody can hear me. Good. Okay, I can see you nodding. So, hello everyone. My name is Hayden. Thank you very much for having me with you today. It's been a very interesting discussion so far. I've been taking many notes, and just as Helen said, there's lots of promising news from Katarina's speech. So that was very good to hear. So yes, my name is Hayden. I work for the European Disability Forum. We call ourselves EDF for short. And we represent all persons with disabilities in Europe, and we represent all different kinds of disabilities. So as we've heard, the European Commission will be making a new strategy for persons with disabilities, and this strategy will normally last for the next 10 years. And it's very important that the strategy supports persons with disabilities to be able to find jobs. As Katarina said, it's often one of the things that persons with disabilities mention as being the biggest challenge for them and the thing that they want to see the most action taken on. As we know, having a job can make a big difference in a person's life. As Sufyan mentioned at the very beginning, sometimes a job is important because it can help us earn the money that we need to live and to do the things we enjoy. But this isn't the only thing, of course. Having a job is also a way of using your skills. It's a way to get experience and to make skills even better. It's a way of spending your days doing something you find interesting. It's a way of meeting other people and learning from them, and for them to learn from you. And it's also being part of your community and doing things that help the people around you. So it's really an important thing. And this is why we think it's really important that the disability strategy do a lot on the subject of employment. So at EDF, the European Disability Forum, not to be confused with EDS, European Disability Strategy, we've already sent lots of our ideas to the Commission. So we've sent a big document with lots of ideas for things that we want to see in the new strategy. And as you can imagine, many of the ideas are about how to support persons with disabilities in finding good quality jobs and jobs that are right for them. So today I want to tell you about some of the ideas that we have. I'm not going to speak about all of them because that would definitely take too long, but instead I'll just tell you about the most important ones. So firstly, we want the Commission to work on making sure that workplaces can be changed when a person with disabilities needs it. And as Katarina mentioned, we call this reasonable accommodation. So essentially, that means that if a person with a disability needs something changed in the workplace to be able to do their job, then the employer should make that change for them. A really simple example of this is for a person using a wheelchair, the office will need to have things like ramps, it will need to have toilets that are accessible, that are larger, and so on. That's just a very simple example. But the changes will be different for each person, of course. Usually these changes are free, in fact. Often it's things like being able to work from home if you want, which now, of course, we're becoming increasingly used to, but before the pandemic maybe wasn't so common. Sometimes it's things like being able to have different working hours from your colleagues because maybe you might need to go to medical appointments. It can be very simple things like that, which are free, but just about being flexible. Sometimes, however, it does cost money to make changes. And as Katarina mentioned, there is an EU directive, an EU law from the year 2000 on non-discrimination in employment, and it talks about this and it says that it should happen. Unfortunately, it doesn't really happen enough because often people don't understand how to make the changes, or because they're worried about paying for the changes and they don't want to pay the money. We are hoping that the Commission will make some clear guidelines, so guidelines like a document that explains clearly to the countries of the European Union how to do this, and a document that would explain who should pay for different kinds of support. So for some things it would be the employer, the boss that will pay, and other times it will be the government that should give money to help the employer. So we want this to be clear for all countries so everybody knows who is responsible for which costs, if there are costs, and to avoid people saying, oh, well, this isn't for me to pay, it's for somebody else, and for nothing to get done in the end. So we think this would be really important. Another point is that the European Union gives a lot of money to the EU countries, to the member states. And there are rules about how this money should be used and where it should go and for what purpose, for what goal. We want to make sure that the EU countries use quite a bit of this money for making it easier for persons with disabilities to find jobs. We want the money to be used to train persons with disabilities to have the skills that they might need to find the jobs that they want. So this refers back to what Soufiane said at the very beginning about having the skills to do the job that you really want to do. And of course, we want to see money for persons with disabilities that perhaps already have jobs, but they want to learn to do a different kind of work and something that interests them more. We also want some of this money to go towards helping make workplaces more accessible, just like I mentioned before with the reasonable accommodation, because EU money can also be used for this. We also gave some suggestions about fair pay. So we need to make sure that everybody who works gets paid enough money. It's not fair for a person to be paid less than the minimum wage. And unfortunately, this happens quite a lot for persons with disabilities. Now, the European Commission wants to work on the subject of minimum wage. And this means saying what is the lowest amount of money a worker can get and for it to still be fair. We don't know exactly what the Commission's plans are. Perhaps Katarina will know more than me. But so we don't know if it will be a law or if it will be guidelines, for example. But no matter what they do, we want the Commission to be clear about one thing, and that's that no person with a disability who has a job should be paid less than minimum wage in their country. So we rely on the Commission to be very clear and to tell the governments of all EU member states that this is something that's not acceptable. That leads me on to another idea we have, and I'm approaching the end. So when a person has a disability, often what we see is that life becomes much more expensive for this person. So if you can't use public transport, for example, if you can't go to a regular school, or if you need an assistant to support you, for example, all of this can be very expensive, and often you end up paying with money out of your own pocket for these things. So persons with disabilities usually have to pay a lot more to live their lives than people without disabilities. Sometimes the governments in the different EU countries and the member states will give persons with disabilities some money to support them. However, when you find a job, what happens quite often is that this money will stop. You will stop receiving this extra support. And this, as we see it, is not fair because life for persons with disabilities is too expensive often to live with a salary alone. And this money that the government gives you is really to cover the extra costs of living in a society that's inaccessible. So it's to help cover all of the things that become more expensive because you have a disability. So we want there to be rules in the EU so that when persons with disabilities get a job, they can still get at least some of the money that the government was giving them at the same time. And this way, there's some support to pay for the extra things that make life more expensive. And really, it will make things a lot easier for persons with disabilities who are looking for work. And now my last point on our suggestions, and then I will talk very quickly about what disability organizations can do. So I want to talk about what we call freedom of movement in the EU. So in the European Union, you can move to another European Union member state, another country, to live and work there. This is a very special advantage of being part of the European Union. People can go to another country to find a job that interests them and to experience a new way of living, and it's really a wonderful thing. So maybe, for example, you're from Ireland and you want to work in tourism, and perhaps you would like to go to a country like Spain to do this. Well, you can do this. That's your right as a European citizen. And millions of Europeans live in different European countries for this reason. But sadly, for persons with disabilities, this is very, very difficult. Because if you are a person with a disability who gets support from your government, so in these, for example, what I mentioned before, with the government maybe giving you some money, when you move to another member state, this is likely to stop. And often the new country that you move to doesn't recognize that you're a person with a disability. This means that you will need to get a certificate showing that you have a disability all over again. And this can take a very long time. So actually, this is what Katarina was mentioning before about mutual recognition of disability assessment. It means that when you move to another EU country, you don't need to be reassessed again. You can show your certificate from your home country, and you are recognized, or they recognize straight away that you have a disability. And when people move abroad for work, it's extremely difficult job if you don't have the support you need, you're in a new country. And of course, you know, when you're starting a job, the first few months, the first maybe 6 months are the most crucial, because you have to show your boss that you're doing the job well, and it can be very stressful. So for lots of people with disabilities, they simply can't take up the opportunity to move abroad to another member state, and it's a right you have as Europeans, and it's a terrible thing not to be able to do it. Okay, so now I will talk just very quickly about what disability organizations can do. So yeah, essentially the disability strategy, it's really going to be a list of plans and ideas. The most important thing is that these ideas become a reality, because otherwise the strategy isn't very useful at all. So we want the Commission, of course, to do these things and to do them well. And we want to make sure that the Commission and also all of the member states do what they promise, and in a way that really supports persons with disabilities. So what can we do? For every action that the Commission takes as part of the strategy, the disability organizations need to be consulted. So this means that we need the Commission to tell us what their plans are, just as is happening now with the disability strategy as a whole. And then for us in turn to tell them what we think, whether we think the ideas are good, if something needs to be changed, if it really meets the needs of persons with disabilities, or if they have the wrong idea. So this happens. The Commission is very good at consulting, and disability organizations need to be active and to always give the input. It's also very useful for the Commission that we do that. We give them lots of ideas, and we tell them if we think they're making mistakes and so on. So this is the first way we can change what policies look like. So a lot of the things in the new strategy will not be laws, in fact, although hopefully we will get some new laws. Most of the things will be, for example, guidelines or recommendations. So these are things that don't really force the government of an EU country to do something, but it's more to kind of persuade them and show them how to do things well. And in these cases, it's really important that the disability organizations working at the national level in the member states are really active, because we then rely on you to speak with your governments. We need you to make sure that they understand what the recommendations are from the Commission. We rely on you not only to make sure they understand, but that the governments agree to take action and to make these changes in the countries. Because we don't want the EU member states to see the recommendations and to just ignore them. So we can do some persuasive work here in Brussels, Inclusion Europe, the European Disability Forum, and so on. But it's even more important that you with your organizations in the different countries do that work as well. And that's all from me. I'll be very answer any questions, and thanks again for having me today.
Thank you very much, Hayden, for your intervention. It was very clear, as usual, and yes, lots of questions. I guess we'll have some time after to answer some questions. Don't hesitate if you have any to ask them in the chat. I also forgot to mention, but I see that in the chat, Milan, the Director of Inclusion Europe, posted some links, and Barbara as well. So you have all the details. And finally, last but not least, I would like to invite MEP Milan Bergles to speak. He's a member of the Disability Intergroup and of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, to speak, yes, about the impact of the COVID crisis on employment, and what specific measures could be taken in the next disability strategy to address these new issues. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I would like to extend my warm greetings to all participants in this discussion and thank the organizers for inviting me to deliver my insights on this topic, which I found relevant at all times. Nevertheless, it is obvious that current circumstances characterized by the pandemic demand even more engagement in terms of discussion, policy, and action. I would like to present an outlook with relevance to the COVID-19 impact on discrimination in the field of employment of persons with disabilities, as well as try to highlight certain difficulties when it comes to making such assessments. Additionally, I would also like to point out the issue of the extent to which the measures adopted for addressing the COVID-19 crisis have been disability inclusive. In my capacity as a member of the Committee of Employment and Social Affairs, since starting my mandate as MEP last year, I have been following to a considerable extent the issues related to the rights of persons with disabilities. In this regard, I have contributed to the plenary discussion on the post-2020 disability strategy, stating first and foremost that poverty is in itself a violation and a cause of violation of many other human rights of persons with disabilities. Furthermore, I emphasized that persons with disabilities are at greater risk of poverty and also at greater risk of social exclusion. Finally, I have reiterated the importance of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on that matter. It should be acknowledged that the greatest possible enjoyment of human rights of persons with disabilities is a duty of the European Union, as well as all member states parties to the United Nations Convention, the only universal legally binding human rights document that has been ratified by all member states and acceded by the European Union. The adoption of the resolution of the European Parliament following the debate on post-2020 disability strategy was planned in March, but that was the period when the Parliament working process has been disrupted due to lockdown. The resolution was then adopted on plenary session in June, with an amendment acknowledging the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on persons with disabilities. In this regard, the Parliament recognized the serious intensification of challenges and rights violations of persons with disabilities during the COVID crisis. These challenges are two: disruptions in personal assistance, care and support services, unequal access to or complete exclusion from health-related information, healthcare and urgent care, of public safety-related information presented in a clear and lack of precautionary measures in residential institutions, unequal access to the alternatives offered by educational institutions, namely distance and online learning, and an increase in instances of domestic violence. It is therefore of utmost importance that the Parliament in the same resolution called on the Commission to prepare an evaluation of the challenges and rights violations experienced by persons with disabilities during COVID-19 pandemic, as well as on evaluation on the measures adopted by the member states in response to the pandemic, together with an evaluation of the shortcomings of current legislation. It also calls on the Commission to propose specific recovery and mitigation measures in the post-2020 disability strategy to overcome such shortcomings and to prevent them in the future. The aforementioned challenges, in fact, research and even worsen in the months following the Parliament's resolution. However, we still do not know exactly to what extent the crisis affected persons with disabilities, as an EU-wide standardization is very limited. Official disability statistics are rare and they don't distinguish between the type of disability or between race or ethnic origin, sexual orientation, etc. There is hardly any data on the type of employment persons with disabilities have access to. In my estimation, quarantine measures imposed by member states resulted in severe limitations of public services and public transport, which in turn lowered the operational capacity of persons with disabilities and thus affected the general quality of life as well as their employment. Even in the pre-pandemic period, the employment rates of persons with disabilities has been concerning. For example, in the EU, the employment rate of persons with disabilities is around 50% compared to around 75% for persons without disabilities. Furthermore, it is important to note that the type of disability is also a significant factor contributing to unemployment of persons with disabilities. People with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities appear to be among the most affected by unemployment. Persons with disabilities are also more likely to have health conditions and are consequently less able to ensure physical distancing and therefore face accessibility barriers. These barriers have only grown with the imposed pandemic measures. However, the issue is not just in the physical mobility within, but also between member states, in terms of studies and especially work, as highlighted by organizations and awareness campaigns like Freedom Drive. Therefore, it is obvious that lack of foreseeable EU-wide coordination approach towards mobility in the pandemic period significantly hinders the enjoyment of four freedoms, even more so affecting persons with disabilities and their right to employment. The question is if the measures adopted by member states during the COVID-19 crisis have properly addressed the needs of persons with disabilities. A comprehensive assessment in this regard is difficult considering there has been no coherent strategy and each member state took different measures. In addition, each country also has a specific system of addressing the issue of employment of persons with disabilities. For example, a number of states, such as Malta, Bulgaria, and Lithuania, made an increase of funding to their social protection systems as a response to the COVID-19 crisis. Still others accepted measures that expanded or automatically extended disability entitlements. Many countries also made exemptions from quarantine restrictions for persons with disabilities. These are, in my opinion, examples of rights-based policy approaches that, at least to a certain extent, take into consideration the social aspect of addressing COVID-19 crisis. From a more general perspective, I believe one of the aims of the previous disability strategy was in facilitating coherent effort between member states in implementing the UN Convention, as well as an increase in EU-level action so as to gradually supplement national action. The next disability strategy should continue to maintain this stance and strengthen it even further. Corrective measures on the state as well as on the EU level must take priority in addressing the needs of vulnerable populations, particularly when it comes to respecting the rights of persons with disabilities. Priority setting is in a political decision, so the next strategy should foster awareness of the responsibility and duty we have towards persons with disability. The issue is not so much which specific measures should be included in the new disability strategy, but how to make these provisions more binding for the member states. One such approach would be EU-wide minimum standard in relation to assistance and service availability. The strategy should step up the targeting actions to include the recognition of diversity of disabilities. Nevertheless, we also need a general framework such as potential disability rights guarantee, EU-wide safety net. If I turn back to my field of work as a member of the Parliament's Employment and Social Affairs Committee, I would like to emphasize my understanding of the disability policy in the context of intersectionality. In this regard, I attach to it considerable importance in my main work as current reporter for demography. For example, I found an extension of the cohesion funds, especially the European Regional Development Fund and European Social Funds and the future ESF Plus as available means to address the demographic trends, whereby, in addition to the focus on vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, like other people and children, attention should be given also to the persons with disabilities. What I also push for in this context is to call on the member states to adopt the Council Directive on implementing the principle of equal treatment between persons irrespective of religion or belief, disability, age, or sexual orientation. Last but not least, I'm pleased to say that just yesterday, the Parliament voted in favor of strengthening the youth guarantee. The resolution explicitly acknowledges that young persons with disabilities have been hit particularly hard by the effects of the pandemic and are now at an even higher risk of social economic exclusion. It also calls for targeted measures to support their integration into the labour market and to ensure access to quality services so that they face no discrimination on barriers of any kind, including financial ones. The intersectional dimension is also addressed as it calls for specifically tailored services for young persons with disabilities, homeless young people, young Roma, and young migrants and refugees who have diverse needs that should be met with specifically tailored services. As a closing remark, I would like to express my belief that every policy should be addressed by the way it accommodates the most vulnerable members of the society. More concretely, the next strategy must therefore include the aspects of mainstreaming the social inclusion of persons with disabilities in exactly all policies, from the coordination of social security systems to the new Green Deal. I'm pleased to note that the Parliament's position towards employment policy of persons with disabilities is rightly oriented towards sustainability and rights-based principles. Finally, while I do understand that the COVID-19 relief efforts put additional challenges in member states' policy making, I still regret that so far there has been a primary focus on the issues pertaining to economic stability, whereas the social dimension has been insufficiently endorsed. Having said that, I call on all of us to see the person before her or his disability. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was also very interesting to have your insights. And I see that we already have some questions in the chat. I think that there's one for both of you, Milan Bergles and Katarina Ivankovic-Nežević. There's one on following Hayden's presentation. It says DPO should keep more governments alerted on what the disability strategy states. But what happens, what can DG Employment and the Disability Intergroup do when there's when DPOs are ignored by their governments? I don't know who wants to answer first. Who has an answer?
I can go first. I'm not sure that I have the answer, but but I can still go first. Well, thank you for the presentations, and it was really interesting. I was taking many notes, and I will pass the info to my colleagues, and we have some of our colleagues from the Commission already with us today. But nevertheless, I think that Hayden raised some extremely important issues, and not only in the light of employment of persons with disabilities, but also in this matter relevant to governance of the strategy and the governance of the situation of the persons with disabilities at the EU level, but also in the member states. I strongly support that DPOs should really push their organization at the national level to have a further visibility and to have a further influence, because this is where the real politics and real life happens, and this is where improvements can also be seen. Now, I have been saying this for last year already. Now it is a crucial time, because all the new EU funding perspectives are going to be negotiated. And we all know, if we put it on the table, then it will be a part of the future programs and implementation. If we don't put it, then it won't. So the situation is quite simple if you look at it that way, but it's not really easy to find a way how to address and how to put it as one of the priorities. I think also when we speak about the role of EU and the member states, I don't think that anybody would disagree that we play under different competencies, and the competencies at the EU level are a bit different than the competencies of the member states. And I think this should be clearly acknowledged and clearly stated. Also, when it comes to the future initiatives, yes, it's true. Many of them will have not non-binding nature due to the treaties-related competencies, but there might be some of those that do have a solid legal base and that we will act upon. And this is indeed particularly visible in the light of the free movement, in the light of securing the inclusion of workers with disability and people with disability in the workforce, and securing some elements relevant to the social protection. Although you know that regarding the social protection, we are also playing on a slippery field, and now we have our recommendation on the social protection, and that is about to be seen how the member states will implement it, and where the rights relevant for the persons with disability play an important role, either in the light of health security, but also in the light of all the disability benefits and employment benefits. What I think is a good way to reflect on how to secure what Hayden was saying about possibilities of persons with disabilities to increase their income. We see that in many member states where persons with disability receive some kind of disability benefit, it is usually quite lower than sufficient for a decent living. We also see this with beneficiaries of the so-called guaranteed minimum income throughout different member states, and the fact that when those people are offered a job, many times the job does not pay, and therefore they're reluctant into engaging with low-paid jobs and low-paid salaries that would put them just in the other cohort of in-work poverty. And there are different ways how to deal with this topic, so that there are possibilities that people do not lose the benefits that they have when gaining employment for a certain period of time. It could be gradually that they lose the benefit, or it could be really that some benefits are just guaranteed for person and do not form the overall income as it does for the persons without, let's say, disability, or those without gaining the guaranteed minimum income. So there are really so many topics that we can work on, and so many topics that require further assistance, and especially in the light of what I mentioned already, and Hayden spoke about it, the mutual recognition. The first step would be really to find an agreement among the member states how they identify the disability, so that we do not have differences such as in one member state you have like to undertake regular evaluation if you are a person with Down syndrome, and in some other member states, if you are identified once, you never have to prove that you have the Down syndrome, which is for all of us dealing with the topic, we know what to think about it, and it's those kind of things that at first do not look like maybe a huge or a big deal, but really create a difference. And I think we did not speak about it today, but in order to secure really the free movement of persons with disabilities, we know that in almost all the member states, when the students with disability come to another member state to study, they also have to undertake this complex assessment, and in order to gain some rights which should not be the case. So these are all fields that we are going to open. Some of those fields have never been opened before, and therefore I would ask you to be kind to ourselves as well, as you know that process of achieving a certain target and certain goal is really a process, and we need to undertake all the steps, and even if they're baby steps, but I think it's most relevant that we open the discussion and that we put it on the table and really have a clear as much possible agenda how we want to gradually get and where do we want to get. Also an issue if we would be able to agree with the member states on, for example, let's say the disability related targets up until certain year, maybe 2030, and then how the member states would buy in. This is also, I think, a question for a separate couple of hours discussion. Thank you. I hope I replied the answer. I also saw the other answer, so I can take it now that the other colleagues have more time later. On the, would we think within the Commission how to deal with the persons with disability? Yes, we are thinking. It will be visible in the strategy which direction we are taking. And it is very important to include persons with all kinds of disabilities within different services, not only in the Commission, but in the rest of the EU institutions. And this will be a part of our discussion, interinstitutional discussion on how to take disability onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. Perhaps I could give the floor to MEP Burgess if you want to answer, because I also know that you have to leave at 11:30. So.
Yeah. Okay. What intergroup should do, or what Parliament as such should do? Whenever we get the information, one of the most easiest ways to make a pressure, either on other institutions within the European Union, and intergroup serves to gain the momentum. When we are asking, it is not so easy. You get more parliamentarians through intergroup behind you, but this is more or less political. What I see as a very important step, and what is very, very necessary before we clarify, or we should clarify, what is on the EU level and what is on the national level. And this distinction of jurisdiction is at the moment not totally clear. Next to that, it comes how the EU laws already exist are in accordance with UN Convention. And when we do all those things, probably we can be able, but knowing the political situation, very unlikely, to go to the optional protocol, when then you can open the issue directly. Overcoming all those, and even blaming EU institutions that they are not doing properly the work. But I'm not so much concerned by that one, but actually that for such a step, consent of every member state within the European Union is necessary. But you know, parliamentarians mostly are, or we more easily address issues which are connected with specific rules which already exist. And if we can rely on that, or if they go against certain principles, then it is a bit easier to make pressure, or at least to ask questions either to the Commission or to the Council. It is always possible to do that way. Somehow, in that way, also you get a kind of internationalization of the issue, which is more or less domestic one. But it's always the question of to consider what is more proper, which approach will actually fulfill or which will repair the situation with particular persons with disability, which will help them. It is sometimes also not the best way to put it on the highest level of political visibility, because then nothing will happen and the government will do totally the opposite what someone would like. So it is, you know, you have to discuss this issue, and politicians sometimes know a bit more what is most adequate in particular political situations. So always is connected also with political situation. You cannot, despite we are all speak that this is not, yeah, it is. And when, for instance, persons with disability are able to put particular measure on the level of legislation, there is no politician who would say no, no way. But they will try to prevent that this is happening before. This is, if they have such consideration, and if, but mostly because of financing, because this is, you know, very costly in many ways, and I do not see that this is the best way to approach the issue. And I very like, you know, this starting point with UN Convention. It is very, very important, because in the long run, meaning that all EU law have to be compatible, and it is impossible. Even the court can be used in this respect. It will take time, but it's better to do before that.
Thank you very much for your answer. I don't know if perhaps you've also seen the other question on employing people in the EU institutions. If you have any insight from the Parliament side on this question.
No, not specific one, so operational one. But I hope that we are not behaving similarly to other standards, like in case of, you know, pandemic was very bad for cleaning stuff and others in the parliament and some others. If we behave the same way, then looking for the loopholes in the national legislation, not to follow the principles which are at EU level more or less accepted, or at least politically accepted within the parliament, then there we will have a lot of work also here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And also this question leads me to a very good transition to promote the next webinar, which will be on creating employment opportunities in the EU institutions for people with intellectual disabilities. I know it's not the end of the webinar, but because it's a good link, so that's why. It will be on the 14th of October from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. If you want to join, you can already register on Inclusion Europe's website. And then we have two other questions, actually. On any, so you spoke of mainstreaming and horizontal perspective in policy making of the disability point of view. And the question is whether there are any plans to interlink the different EU programs and to see whether they are really inclusive or not. Perhaps this one, it could be Mrs. Katarina Ivankovic-Knevich that could answer.
Yes, well, I think that's the crucial point, to interlink the different strategies, action plans, and the funding instruments. And I think this is the key point. It's also very important that, like, if you take, for example, what we have so far, so we have adopted the new gender equality strategy, where we also put a reference to the persons with disabilities, and especially women and girls with disability. But we also say that this will be addressed in the new disability strategy. The same goes for LGBTI strategy, or Roma, and I think extremely important anti-racism strategy in this respect. I think one of the still to be seen, how are we going to achieve the question relevant to intersectionality, and sometimes it is really not easy to see on which basis a person might be discriminated, and this is I think a huge task for all of us, and this is also part of our strategies. Just to mention that, for example, in the European Child Guarantee that we are preparing, we pay particular attention to children with disability, and they are going to have the place as being one of the group relevant for the children in need, and also as having specific activities relevant for the children with disabilities in order to secure their inclusion in early childcare and education, and in the educational system in the mainstream schools on equal footing with the other children. And this is so these are just few examples that I showed you, that really you could see that it's all interconnected. In the end, I think it's the most important place. How are we going to identify this connection is going to be our action plan on the implementation of the pillar. And I think all the stakeholders have high expectations, and it will be very, very important to have these elements there, but also in any other document that we had. Let me just share with you that you know that Commission has established the Equality Task Force, so not only that we have a first ever equality commissioner, but we have Equality Task Force. And just yesterday we held the training for all the colleagues, equality coordinators, and those dealing with various files on how to mainstream and how to take on board the disability angle. It was extremely interesting to see how the colleagues reacted, how they still require much more information sharing and knowledge gathering than we thought, because also in a different commission services, you have some colleagues who have been dealing with disability maybe, but not all of them. But what we want is really that disability is mainstream in all the documents, so that we don't, when we speak about anything relating from sport to digital to health related topics, that colleagues in different institutions reflect how does it affect persons with disabilities, and should there be something put in. So this is the approach that we took. It is I have to say it's not an easy task, because we are constantly asking and pushing and interfering into so many different files, you know, from agri policy to the revision of the operational programs. And it's really the wide areas of action. But in the end, I think this is the only way to really secure the disability mainstreaming that we want to have in the mandate of this commission.
Thank you very much for your answer. It's great news, and I think it's very interesting that you're having those kinds of initiatives. It might seem a bit bold, but if you have, if you need any help from civil society organizations, we would be happy to help you also for this mainstreaming, because we think it's a very important aspect that disability is seen and examined in all the different EU instruments. I don't know if perhaps Hayden, you have any comments or any suggestions or anything to add on this. I'm also sorry I didn't ask you for the previous question, so feel free on the previous answers.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I was having a slight issue. No, I mean, I think everything has been said already, and I wanted to say I'm looking forward to your webinar on persons with disabilities working in the EU institutions. I think that's going to be really interesting. That's something that EDF we're also looking at, and yes, it's definitely important to have persons with disabilities working in the institutions, making decisions for persons with disabilities. So yeah, I'll definitely be joining you then for that event. But other than that, I don't have anything to add. I mean, the answers have been so complete. I think it's, yeah, everything's been said.
Great. Oh, we have another question on intersectionality and anti-racism strategy, whether there's going to be race-based disaggregated data to examine the impact on people with disabilities. So Katerina, you mentioned data collecting and your work with Eurostat. Perhaps you have any insights on this?
Well, I think let's take one step at a time, and let's secure that data regularly collected are really disaggregated, and that they provide us yearly or bi-yearly evidence of the status and the numbers of persons with disabilities. I'm not really 100% sure on the reply on the anti-racism and how would it be disaggregated by the race. So I'm not going to go into it, but if whoever asked the question would like to know more, just send me an email and then I'll ask my colleagues who know.
Well, thank you very much. So we can share your email address to the participants who asked the question. I see that there are no other questions in the chat. There are 7 minutes left before MEP Milan Bergles needs to leave. I don't know if perhaps you would like to take the floor last time for a final comment or final remark.
Yeah, thank you. I will be rather short. For me, anytime when we speak, anytime when I see someone raising specific issues concerning disabilities, learning time. The question is, how you can address that. I'm glad that we have some tools available, but we have to expand the scope. On some other issues, the question of if the EU has something to do at this level, if it has jurisdiction or not, it is very questionable. But here we are under the umbrella, and this umbrella somehow shows us what we have to do. So in this respect, it is very enlightening for me to see that you are, that you are joining forces at the EU level on one side, and yeah, and mostly I also help, or I like to see also national persons disability organizations to be connected with this European umbrella. It is a bit easier, and when you are trying to speak to both it is easier to raise some issues. And as I said before, whenever you are able to put it on the political agenda, there is no politician that will be dare to go against it. So it is very much important how to do it properly and how to put it at the right time, not to be as previous. When we are now discussing the future financing, now is the time, at least for some of those issues. So sometimes if we will have, let's say, strategy much later, it is very hard, some money will be reserved, but probably not enough. And it will be next multi-annual financial framework, which will be actually the most important, but in between, we have to do also periodic review. We have to also make a response to the committee of UN committee on the issue. In the review is in next year, actually. So we have to take any of such times to put some let's say the visibility also within the parliament with at least one of the organ will be much, that is the time for the parliament to act. And on the other side, now when we have the commissioner, when we have the, let's say, this focus, I hope that this is also time and the mandate when we can do very important steps when someone cannot then go back, and we will see how far we can achieve that. At the end of the day, okay, despite the parliament, it is very important for financing. It is not the only one. We have to make compromises with member states. And member states, also for such issues as disability, are much more hidden than parliamentarians are. So sometimes the problem is there, how far we can go into that direction. But I see these complementarities of two levels and the importance that disability is integrated also at EU law level, very, very, very important, because with that you will get also tools to challenge, even legally, if things will not go in the proper direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can now thank you very much for your last comments and participation. We are very grateful that you accepted to be here today, and I hope we'll leave you just on time. So that's it. And I see no other questions, so perhaps if some of you have a last question, otherwise I think we can conclude this webinar. It was very interesting to have all your perspective. I hope we can have a follow-up with all the information that was given. And we look forward for the next action plans and strategies. And don't hesitate to send us an email if you have other questions, or if you would like an email address or ask for anything more. You can find all the information on Inclusion Europe's website, and you can also register for the next webinar, which will be next week. So I'd like to thank you, all of you who participated, and thank you to our guest speakers, Hayden, Sufyan, and Katarina. You were so very interesting to listen to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.